and welcome to Crossroads of Rockland History. I'm Clare Sheridan from the Historical Society of Rockland County. On this episode, we'll turn our attention to the new exhibition at the Haverstraw Brick Museum, the remarkable landscape design of Mary Mowbray-Clarke. The museum's executive director, Rachel Whitlow, and educator, Luke Spaltro, will join me for a preview of this interesting and informative exhibition. A pioneer in every sense of the word, Mary Mowbray-Clarke's story and contributions to the fields of preservation, art education, and landscape design continue to have a lasting impact today. As the mother of the modern arts movement, she organized art exhibitions, ran an influential bookstore, and became the only female foreman of a WPA landscape design project. We'll also learn about the Brick Museum's plans for the future and how Mowbray-Clarke's Dutch garden served as inspiration for its architectural design. The Historical Society of Rockland County is a nonprofit educational institution and principal repository for original documents and artifacts relating to Rockland County. Our headquarters are a 4-acre site featuring a history museum and the 1832 Jacob Blauvelt House located at 20 Zucker Road in New City, New York. We're listed on the National Register of Historic Places and a designated New York State Path Through History site. And part of our broad and challenging mission is to share the history of Rockland County with the public. Our annual appeal is underway, and I hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution. The Historical Society relies on financial support from people just like you. If you're interested in donating, becoming a member of the Society, or learning about volunteer opportunities, please visit our website at rocklandhistory.org. The Haverstraw Brick Museum is dedicated to preserving the cultural and historical past of the village of Haverstraw and the vibrant brick industry that created it. I'm pleased to welcome the museum's executive director, Rachel Whitlow, and the museum educator, Luke Spaltro. Thanks so much for being here on Crossroads. Before we begin speaking about the museum and the new exhibition, take a moment and tell our listeners about yourselves. Rachel?
I came to the museum through Haverstraw, through my friend Andrea Cucara, who has Casa Hudson in Haverstraw. We'd been friends for a very long time, almost 20 years at this point. And she brought me in to help with the brand strategy of the museum. And my background is actually in branding and corporate restructuring. And so when that happened, Richard Senna, who's the president of the museum, asked me to take a look at how I would restructure the museum. And so, as you know from our last talk, we've been on this transformative journey since 2018, and we're excited about that. The reason that I fell in love with the museum is because I went to Cooper Union. I'm now on the board of trustees of Cooper Union. And the 3 schools of Cooper Union, engineering, architecture, and art, really informed how I thought about the restructuring of the museum. I used those 3 schools as a jumping off point and a platform for really looking at, well, what bricks have in common is all 3 of those things. You know, we use clay as a medium. Bricks are brick architecture, and we really are a brick architecture museum. Our mandate is to preserve and protect the brick buildings of New York City, and over 2/3 of the buildings in New York City were built with Haverstraw bricks. And so we really go into the history of brick architecture, and then structural engineering and chemical engineering are both part of how you make bricks and how you use bricks. So that was really my jumping off point for the turnaround of the museum. So that's kind of my inspiration, and we went from there. And that's how we began our explorative journey and got involved with some of our strategic partners. So I know in the last exhibition, or the last time we were interviewed, Claire, we talked about resilient architecture and environmental architecture, specifically brick architecture within an environment. And that was in partnership with Pratt School of Architecture and with one of the professors there, Jonathan Scelsa. And Jonathan Scelsa, as part of his class, brought his students to the museum for us to educate his class on the history of bricks and the history of brick architecture in New York City. And as part of that, we stopped at the Dutch Garden because he felt his partner, Jennifer Birkland, who is landscape architecture at City College, they have a partnership of landscape architecture and brick architecture. So the Dutch Garden kind of exemplified what he was trying to teach, which is responsible design of bricks within an urban living environment. And so he used the Dutch Garden to start teaching about the different ways of thinking about how bricks can be integrated into a structure, into a landscape structure. And so that's the exhibition that you interviewed us for last. After that exhibition, we did a project with Arts Westchester, where we really explored the technology, the 3D printed technology, which you saw.
Mm-hmm.
And that got us really into resilient architecture and environmental architecture. And from there, we got the grant to build a new building. And we asked Jonathan to take a look at how he would, if he were to design the building, what he would do. And again, the Dutch Garden was the inspiration. Also, I should say that Jonathan is an Italian brick architect. So he was very inspired by Biagio, and his wife was, of course, inspired by Mary. And so the two of them really designed the entire museum with the different terraces that we have to evoke those feelings that we got from the Dutch Garden. So when we published about Jonathan designing the museum, well, then the gates opened and we started to get a lot of interest in what we were doing as inspiration. And we started to collect the archives about the Dutch Garden and how they came about. And that's where Luke comes in. He recently joined us as our manager of program education and tourism, but his degree is in history from Rutgers. And so I'm going to introduce him, but he can talk for himself. But he has really taken on going into our archives and protecting them through a document heritage grant that we got. And he really owns, I'll say, the back room of our archives, which is very extensive and goes back to the 1700s. We've been scanning and collating and organizing and assessing. And so now that we're in this project, we started to inherit all these archives about Mary Mowbray-Clarke. So, Luke, I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah, I mean, my background's primarily history. That's how I kind of got involved in the museum. So I did my undergrad, gosh, sorry, 2 years now at Rutgers. My thesis, I think was a pretty informative part on how I go about my study on history. I focused on the divestment movement from South African apartheid as it related to Rutgers. I'm very interested in local history, labor history, social movements, but during that thesis, I got very deeply entrenched in the special collections at Rutgers. Not many things, unfortunately, there are digitized, and their staff is very limited, so appointments were very short, but you make use of them. Everything was physical. Newspapers weren't digitized at all either, so you have to learn how to use microfiche. But it
Yeah.
was still very, it's informative. It was very enjoyable. I got used to reaching out to people, right? In particular, my interest is, in the last 100 odd years, so I'm seeing these names and I'm reaching out to people that I'm seeing in these documents, and you'd be surprised. A lot of people are very gracious, when they're reached out to. If you just explain what you're doing, that they'll give you their time, they'll give you their year, they'll give you their archives, their resources, right? And so I got into a good habit of that. At the same time, at Rutgers, I was also I had a stint at an internship because I did a public history program there at the American Labor Museum. And actually, it's funny, Rachel and I have a little bit of a connection there because her grandmother popped up in their archives when she was doing the reference calls. But yeah, I mean, I graduated. I was working in libraries for a couple of years. And I was like, I like museums. I like history. That's my main passion. I just started sending cold emails and I saw the Brick Museum, like, sure, why not? That's labor related. And I didn't realize what was gonna, ensue. but I shot the email. I got the job, and now I'm here. So yeah, our archives are very, very extensive, dating back to the 1750s to contemporary times. And early on in my job, one of my first days, Rachel was like, before work, go to the Dutch Gardens, right? Just like it's a nice morning. So I went. I was obviously breathtaking. It was very beautiful, leaf peeping season, right? And then from there, it kind of kicked off. We wrote a little small article. We were doing work. Obviously, the design of our new museum is inspired by the lattice work. And then from there, people just started calling. And I noticed too, a lot of the people were local or, of course, directly involved.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about the Haverstraw Brick Museum.
It's actually coming on our 50th anniversary of the inception of when the group got together to raise funds to have the Brick Museum started. And that was actually in 1975, 1976. It was the fall of 1975. They created a bicentennial brick that they then used to raise funds for the beginning of the museum. And the founders of the museum were descendants of the Brickyards and the same founders of the Rockland County Historical Society. So Dan DeNoyles and several of his friends and colleagues. And our archives are kind of actually split because we were both founded by the same people. So Dan DeNoyles had a vision of really creating a museum to preserve and protect the history of the brickyards. And the extension of that is the people who worked in the brickyards, the story of the labor, the workers, the extensive photographic collection of the history of Haverstraw. The brickyard owners were one of the first groups to own a camera in the 1800s, when the camera was first invented. We have photographs, plate photographs from that time period. And it really narrates the historical story of the rise of the labor industry and the infrastructure building of New York City. It's actually a national heritage, I think. It's an extraordinary archive and very, very special. When we were interviewed by the Times, the New York Times photographic curator said that it was a really special archive because it narrates that history about how basically we became the United States, right? And so it really was important to protect that archive. And in 1975 and 1976, when they started to collect these items, I think they collected like 5,000 items. There wasn't really rules about how they were collecting them. They just sort of collected them. So, some things are going off on tangents, but some things are very interesting, and we never know what we're going to find. We're constantly finding things in the archives. And peeling away that onion it's sort of like a holiday every day, right? It's the opening of those little packages. You don't know it's mystery box kind of situation sometimes. But the museum has grown over the years, and in the 1990s, we received our charter in education. And as we discussed on our last show, I've taken that a step further where our focus is now on STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, architecture, and the sculptural arts and math. Then, because our archives are rooted in clay and rooted in the story of clay, we've added in geology and earth science. So, understanding the preservation of the planet. So, that gives us a very well rounded story to tell. And so, we've really built our programming around that as we've grown. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we've grown incredibly fast and exponentially. Our tourism numbers are pretty big, actually. We had over 9,000 visitors last year, which is
Wow,
extraordinary,
amazing.
including about 600 children.
That's
So
great.
that's a lot of people. And I would say that 21% of our visitors come from New York State, and then the rest come from outside of New York State. So we've outgrown our museum, and that's why we're building a new museum. And we had 58 children in there yesterday, and that's not enough room in our little space. And so that's why we applied for and received the seed money for building a new museum, which we are excited about, having the space to show everything that we want to show, over 300 years of history that we want to cover, and really having all the different areas of expertise that the museum now covers really captured in the new building.
You mentioned earlier that the new building was inspired by the Dutch garden. Tell us a little bit more about how that Dutch garden inspired the architectural plans for the new museum.
There's 4 ways that it was inspired. The general museum is 3.5 stories high. It's a very small, narrow space on Main Street. And so there were 3 requirements we gave Jonathan. One was to bring in light as much as possible into the space. And the other was to create outdoor space within the space. The Dutch garden really reflects that, because the 2 ways that he did that was with the brickwork that both Mary and Biagio did, especially the lattice work, inspired what we call a rain screen. In architecture, it's called a rain screen. And that rain screen is in the front of the building. So it will let light in without projecting a lot of light, because we wanted to be sensitive to the neighbors. So if it's an all glass building, if you were going to do like an all glass modern thing in the middle of the village or Main Street, you'd have a lot of light pollution around. And we wanted to keep the architectural integrity of the buildings next to us while also being modern and contemporary. So the rain screen was the solution to that. And then we have this in the same way that Biagio did his lattice work, we have our lattice work for the north entrance. So we're not going to have a front and back anymore. We have a north and a south entrance. And the north entrance has these bow-like windows, and they come out, and then you have the rain screen, and we have the glass behind, and that sort of will create this beautiful effect. And it's actually the almost identical bond, or we're using Flemish bond, which is the Dutch bond, but it's almost the identical style of what Biagio did. Of course, we can't do it the way that he did it, because from a structural point of view, it wouldn't stand up, even though his does stand up, but we need to put something in between
Yes.
to keep it safe. And then the gardens, the way that Mary designed the gardens, where you have these sort of viewpoints through the tea house into the garden, was very important to our architect. So we've done the same thing with our terraces, where we have multiple terraces throughout the museum for visitors to have outdoor space. We wanted to be able to capture the views of the Hudson River and the views of High Tor. And so the different terraces give you that outdoor space in the heart of the village, the viewpoints out into those little terraces. Both of those are reflected in the design of the museum. And then the third thing is the way that they thought about the brickwork in the tea house, the way the different designs of the brickwork. We've actually brought the bricks from the outside of the museum into the museum. And this is a new thing that we're just figuring out now, that we developed in the fall. But we will have brick coming into the museum, into the library area, and that will display our decorative bricks. So bricks were used not just as a found structurally, but also decoratively. So we're preserving and protecting some of the decorative bricks that you see around Haverstraw. Some of the buildings that are coming down, we are capturing those bricks, decorative roundels and carvings. And those will then appear inside the museum. And we will be using some of the designs from Mary Mowbray-Clarke in that part of the museum as well.
You mentioned that as word got out about Mary Mowbray-Clarke being an inspiration for your museum, is that when you started getting people calling saying, I have this of Mary Mowbray-Clarke's.
Yes, the Mary collection is split between two donors and then one lender at the moment. The first donor, yeah, it was just a random call. He's calling me from the Carolinas. He's like, I got all this stuff in front of me. I think you're gonna love it, you know. And he's like, I have the original blueprints. And I'm like, get out of here, right? And he's like, I'll be up there in, a couple months or whatever, and we'll do what we gotta do. And so that was from the Williamson family. That collection was, from what I can understand, two original blueprints. Mary was very intricate in her designs, mixing native and European flowers. She was very intricate in how she placed everything. Everything was with a purpose, as well as her brickwork. She kind of used like Biagio, not to dismiss him, and as well as our other workers, but she understood how to use the brickwork, right, and how to make these designs. So they very much were collaborators, I would call them. So we get that first donation of some of the original blueprints. And the way that Bob was related to the Dutch gardens was that he was part of the restoration effort. Now, the gardens fell, into disrepair a couple of times, first in the 60s. But then really through the next couple of decades, there's a number of instances of vandalism, spray paint, some of the lattice work walls are kicked down and torn down. And we have some of those pictures. Unfortunately a really sad picture. Doesn't look like that today, thankfully, because of the Friends of the Dutch Garden. So that's how he was related to it. And from what he remembered, he was just like, he was one of the younger ones there, and he was just kind of imparted these materials. So his collection mainly consisted of that, as well as some of her personal glass negatives around South Mountain. I think we have some pictures of the Sloan House, which is right next door, being built, as well as one of her early scrapbooks. So that, contained information on her involvement in the 1913 Armory Show and the birth of the American modern art movement, her time as being a governess to the Cromwell twins. We have wonderful photographs about that, as well as some slides from High Tour. And, there's a lot of things, and I can go on for it forever. She was a very important figure in saving High Tour. From there, we started working on it more. We started digging, we started digitizing, and Rachel and I are thinking like, we should make this an exhibition, right? Realistically, she's a very important figure to not only Rockland and the Brickyards, but just in the decorative arts world in general. We started talking, and from there, I just started looking around online. I just posted on Facebook like, hey, does anybody have any information, on South Mountain? And a lot of people reached out, very generous. The Newman family was very generous as well. They had donated some of their stuff to the University of Austin, Texas, the Sunwise Turn papers, because she co-ran that bookstore. But Paul, he still had a lot of her stuff relating to the Dutch gardens. He was very gracious to tour me around the Brocken, which was her home. Again, beautiful, intricate brickwork, as well as the Henry Varnum Poorhouse, the Crow House, which very intricate house, as well as pottery and so forth. From there, a lot of that collection was gold in terms of pictures, a lot of original film that Mary took while the garden was being built, a lot of original photos just of the workers, really good stuff. And then from there, we got in contact with Justin. I had already been reading his work. He saw the post, so we got connected, and he was very gracious enough to come up from Philly and give us a loan of materials. Now, Justin is a very important figure in this, of course. He's Mary's preeminent biographer. And like Janet, who is Paul Newman's mother, he was very instrumental in going into Mary's house after she had passed and salvaging materials. He hadn't gotten to this box really looking through it, but this box that he gave us on loan, just amazing stuff on notes about her brickwork, the history behind it, really good stuff.
That's great. That's so exciting. Mary Mowbray-Clarke was a fascinating woman who deserves more recognition, as we know. I'd love for you each to pick out one fact about her that you think is important for people to know that they wouldn't already know. Rachel, you want to start?
So we actually submitted Mary to the Untold Stories Project. So I don't know if you know this, but Governor Hochul has tasked I think it's New York State Tourism Council as part of NISTIA, the governor's task force for tourism, to come up with 250 untold stories. And so we're submitting two people. Mary is one of the ones that we're submitting. And one of the reasons that we submitted her is because she was an extraordinary, remarkable woman. I mean, that's the title of our exhibition. At a time when women didn't have that many rights and we're still fighting for equality, Mary was a pioneer. And we feel that it's really important to tell her story. And I have to confess, I went to art school, I studied art. I went to LaGuardia High School. I studied art history specifically for almost 16 years, right? All told. And I never heard of Mary. And so I think it's absolutely a shame that this woman who really it was the mother of the modernist art movement has never been taught in the history in art school, in any art school. What she did at the Armory show, I mean, let's face it, I mean, her husband gets a lot of the credit, but she and her ladies were the people behind the scenes who brought and curated this exhibition, which changed the world of art. I don't think that there's really a lot known about that. This exhibition, this 1913 exhibition, it brought the European artists, the Vincent van Gogh, Picasso, Braque, all these extraordinary artists that Americans had never heard of
Hmm.
to the United States for the very, very first time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Marcel Duchamp. I mean, all these extraordinary paintings that are now form the backbone of half the museums in the continental US. These
Yep.
are the most important paintings of our time, and it's Mary who brought those pieces here.
Hmm.
Think about that for a minute.
I went to many of the 100th anniversary exhibitions of the Armory Show in sort of the tri-state area, and
Not a word, right?
yeah,
Not a
nothing
word.
about her. And I have to credit Justin a little bit for being the person who really has dug into all those records and notes and to find out that she was much more involved in it than anybody knew before. She was married to her husband who was involved directly, and that's historically known. But it's so true about so many women. They were working behind the scenes and just, didn't
Making
get,
stuff happen.
yeah, making stuff happen, but never got their name written up. So great that you have nominated her for the Untold Stories. How about you, Luke? What's one thing about Mary Mowbray-Clarke that you think people should know?
I mean, obviously that she was a multidisciplinarian to say the least, but being a historian, she was really invested into history, as well as she just understood, I guess, the importance of it. I can give a couple examples. It's paraphrased a little bit in an interview upon her 80th birthday, but she says, when planting a garden, you have to think about it, how it's going to look like 100 years from now. Or the Brocken, which was on the Gurney family plot. Abram Hewitt, the figure behind the New York subway system, those were his grandparents. And she, of course, added on to that family plot, old Dutch house. And she really, really researched Rockland history. And she actually had a big connection to the Rockland County Historical Society, or was then called the Rockland Society, in Justin's papers that he salvaged from Mary's attic. I find there's a really funny exchange between George Henry Budke, who was one of your institution's founders, and Mary. Mary again, she was always in five places everywhere. She had a very busy schedule. So Budke reads her writing in the newspapers because during the Great Depression, my guess is that's how she was trying to make some money. She was writing about Rockland history and the Nyack Evening Journal and so forth. He presumably reads some of this material and he's like, hey, why don't you join the Historical Society? And it takes Mary about a year later for her to respond. And she's like, yeah, I'll join. Like, thank you. I'd love to join some of your meetings. Of course, a lot of historical research into the Dutch gardens. And then in, I believe, 1938, they have a big thing to where the Rockland Society kind of opens their first museum in the county courthouse. And then
Hmm.
afterwards, they go directly to the Dutch gardens and they have like a tea party. So that's a little unknown tidbit, I feel.
As we're sort of peeling away the onion of Mary because she did so many things, we discover that she saved High Tor. And, as you know, a part of our mandate is preservation. And so we immediately took a look at that. And it looks, the south entrance of our new museum has a viewpoint of High Tor Mountain. So now we're having a two-story window that's going to look out on High Tor that Mary preserved. And I think that that's going to be extremely meaningful. It'll be Mary's window. I didn't know that she saved High Tor. Imagine if High Tor had been chopped off the top there.
This is right after the Dutch gardens are completed. Of course, her magnum opus. The brickyards are pretty much fully under at this point. The Genoa's brickyard goes in under in 1942. During this time, the trap rock companies really are, the next industry. I mean, we still have Tilcon, right?
Hmm.
Rockland, we're known for our rocks, right? So each industry kind of, goes one after the other throughout history. And High Tor was kind of seen as the next target. Maxwell Anderson, another South Mountain Road figure that Mary kind of brings into her circle, he obviously writes the play High Tor about the Van Ordens. Now, the Van Ordens, they owned High Tor for about 150 so years or on record. The myth is that they, owned it before the revolution, but papers don't supply that information. But I digress. After Elmer Van Orden, the last one in the lineage, dies, the estate goes up for sale. And using her skills throughout her life, and especially from the Armory Show of organizing artists and exhibitions, she organizes a traveling exhibition through Rockland that's seen by about, a couple thousand people, three or so thousand children, lasts for about 2 months. She gives lectures at each exhibition, so that's part of our collection. We have her slides, her slideshow, as well as some of her notes that she was referencing. They described it once it was all said and done as a unique chapter in American art history. Like they had already recognized, the significance of this exhibition. It was, pretty much all South Mountain Road artists, and that exhibition raised the funds needed to purchase the mountain. And directly after that, they pass it off to the Palisades Interstate Park Conservancy, who still look after the mountain.
We are so grateful for their efforts. The Brick Museum and the plans for the new museum are part of a significant downtown revitalization plan for Haverstraw. Can you talk a little bit about that?
As you may or may not know, Haverstraw is an opportunity zone. What that means is that there's actually a lot of poverty in Haverstraw. But one of the things that Haverstraw has that very few villages has is 3 miles of untouched, protected waterfront. The museum is partners with Scenic Hudson, and we think of that part of the waterfront. It's actually where the former brickyards were. And so that's sort of our outdoor museum. We work with Scenic Hudson to protect what's now Emmeline Park is a former brickyard. It's the end of the Fowler brickyard where the restaurant was. And that's the land that Scenic Hudson protects. That whole waterfront area to the, let's say, Main Street and Jefferson Street are part of a strategic plan, a comprehensive plan for economic development. And I like to call it the blue zone. So we want to make it from red, which is opportunity zone, to blue economic zone. The idea here is in the same way that Dia Beacon has helped to transform Beacon, or Corning Museum of Glass has helped to transform Corning. Here, the museum, Brick Museum, is being tasked with the role of helping to transform downtown Haverstraw. We have to stick to our charter and our mandate of education and preservation, and we will do that with the community, but we're going to bring the community along with us. Our story of immigration is extremely important. I think of Haverstraw Village as a continuous sanctuary village since 1616, meaning that immigrants have come to Haverstraw continuously since 1616, working class immigrants. And that's the same thing today. So that's an extremely important story to tell. That's what our archives say. And that is what our job is. We're working with the village of Haverstraw to be part of that comprehensive revitalization of the village and help all of Main Street be revitalized. Because in the 50s, when 9W was built, all the commerce was taken off of Main Street. And that happened in a lot of villages. And so the job here of the museum is to provide jobs, to provide a trickle down effect, so lift the shops along the street with us, And we know that we're already starting to do that. We can say that we've had a 17% impact economically on the restaurant and the shops nearest to us. And we're working with the Presbyterian Church because they have their Tiffany windows. And we think that that Presbyterian Church is extraordinary and needs to be protected. So we've kind of put our arms around that as part of our storytelling. So we're really working with connecting waterfront to Main Street to 9W because the church is really up by 9W. So if you think about that, that's kind of our museum mile or our museum quarter. If you think of the village as a living museum, right? A walkable living museum. The village itself, because it's been poor, is actually a great thing because a lot of the buildings have been preserved, right? So it hasn't changed. Maybe if we were a wealthier village, the architecture would have been knocked down and be built. But our brick architecture from the 1800s, from the Gilded Age, is relatively intact, which makes it a treasure, I think. And so that's something that we take very seriously. And so we want to create that connector. We also have a partnership with Ossining. So we've been working with the Sing Sing Prison Museum. We did an ad campaign last year with Metro North, 2 museums, 1 incredible day. So, we're only 45 minutes really from New York City, 60 minutes if you take the train. And so pushing traffic from Grand Central, which, by the way, we built. Haverstraw Bricks built Grand Central. So pushing tourism traffic from Grand Central to the ferry and then across is something that we want to embrace and make happen more aggressively, I would say. So we're working with Sing Sing Prison Museum as part of they're one of our partnerships. And I would say that I call it the Hudson Museum Mile because we're also working with the Maritime Museum in Kingston, anything within the diamond. So we've been doing a lot of work with the brick diamond, meaning all the brickyards of New York City. There's 135 brickyards going from Haverstraw, Beacon, Newburgh, and then Kingston. So within that, it's the Hudson Museum Mile. And so we want to celebrate and work together as part of that.
That's great. Tell us how people can learn more about the Mary Mowbray-Clarke exhibition and about the new museum plans.
Social media, of course, we are on Instagram and Facebook. Be out on the lookout for our posts. Our website is haverstrawbrickmuseum.org. You can see plenty of updates, brick talks where we dive into our archives and talk about these things and their impact in contemporary times. Of course, you can find more information on the exhibition there, as well as the new museum project. Just look at the top part of our website. And of course, it'll be changing. We'll be moving into a temporary space while that museum is being built. But the Mary exhibition is always going to stay with us, evolve with us, depending on what we're feeling. I mean, we're in again, we're in a very small space right now. We pretty much ran out of room with the current exhibition that's up. We didn't even get to start touching High Tour or the Armory show that much for that matter. So it'll constantly be evolving. There will always be new stuff to see and new stuff to discover, new donations.
If you become a member of the museum, there are some benefits to that. One, you'll be contributing to supporting the museum and the programming that we provide. The other benefit to the membership is our quarterly journal that will do deeper dives. So our brick talks, I call them the amuse-bouche of history, right? They're little teaser and little appetizers of what is in our archives. We can't go too deep into them, but if you're really into any of the subjects that we touch on, we will be producing a quarterly journal that we'll have sponsors for certain kinds of parts of it. And they're in themes. So we have a preservation issue, an innovation issue, and they come out 4 times a year. And so if you join at a certain level, you will have access to our quarterly journal, as well as special membership opportunities to special trips and curated experiences that we will be providing.
That's great. Any final thoughts?
Come to the museum. You got to come to the museum. Simple as
Absolutely.
that.
I highly recommend
Thank
this
you.
exhibition. It is small, It is mighty, and it leaves people wanting more. That's what you want in an exhibition. How about you, Rachel? Any final thoughts?
I think Small and Mighty is amazing. Our archives are so deep that it's frustrating as curators to not be able to show the depth of everything that we want to show. Our current space is an amuse-bouche of what we can, but we really have 350 years of archives to tell stories of. So the more you help and contribute to our cause, the more we'll be able to provide this kind of programming. The more varied our exhibitions will be, and the more we'll be able to revolve and show the different aspects of what we have going on. It's endless. I said to Luke the other day, I said, we could talk about Mary for the next 10 years. And she's only one of the significant figures in our archives. We have another family, the Hova family, brick owners. That's the next brick talk we're going to do with you. I mean,
Excellent.
that's an amazing story to tell. There's endless little things in our archives that send us down rabbit holes that we could write books about. And I think everybody needs to know. So
Mhm.
you want to be a part of this experience, you got to join us. And that's what I'll leave you with.
Excellent. Well, Luke and Rachel, thank you so much for coming on Crossroads. We will definitely be following what's going on there because it's exciting. And I always say to people that there is no end to history in Rockland County. And even just in the little village of Haverstraw, there's so many great stories, so many great pieces of history. Keep in mind that all the information that we discussed will be available in the show notes and at rocklandhistory.org. The Haverstraw Brick Museum and Center for Historic Preservation is located at 12 Main Street in the village of Haverstraw, New York. The new exhibition is entitled The Remarkable Landscape Design of Mary Mowbray-Clarke. The museum is open on Saturdays and Sundays, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., and by appointment on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. There's a suggested donation of $6 per person. The Brick Museum's web address is haverstrawbrickmuseum.org. That's haverstrawbrickmuseum.org. I hope you'll tune in to the next Crossroads of Rockland History, which will begin streaming on Monday, April 20th. Check out the Historical Society's website, where you can learn all about the events and programs coming up. Our web address is rocklandhistory.org. You can call us at 845-634-9629. That's rocklandhistory.org or 845-634-9629. Another great way to keep up with us is to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Or you can read our blog on Tumblr. And don't forget that past episodes of Crossroads, and there are over 180 of them, are archived at rocklandhistory.org as podcasts, and you can also find episodes archived on all major podcast platforms. I'm Clare Sheridan. Thanks for listening to Crossroads of Rockland History.